Jørgensen. I work as innovation manager in Simla, which is one of the partners in the Nora network. More specifically, I work in our startup incubator, Gründergarasjen, and I'm also the person leading the Nora startup steering group. Nora is a national network that wants to strengthen research, innovation, and education within machine learning, artificial intelligence, and robotics in Norway. And the Nora.startup is an innovation network within the Nora consortium, focusing on closer interaction, collaboration, and competence between the research environment and the startup environment in Norway within the mentioned fields. And one of the things that a lot of our startups, of course, are curious about is how can they find ways of processing big data sets and so forth. And today, on today's webinar, we have with us the National or the Euro Competence Center in Norway through the National Competence Center for Industrial Use of High Performance Computing, who will be telling you a little bit more about themselves and how they can help you. And with us today, we have Roger Kvam from Uninet Sigma 2 and Espen Flage-Larsen from Sintef. And with them as well in the further discussion later on, they have also some additional colleagues. So with that, I would like to pass the word on to Espen and Roger.
Thanks. Pleasure to be here. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, yep. We can.
Yeah, perfect. So let me start a little bit here by giving an introduction. So I'm just going to share the screen and then we can take it from there. Like so. Okay, so yeah. So there's been a lot of discussion in the EU how we can ensure that sort of the European economy and sort of business atmosphere, etc., is sustainable into the future. As we all, or many of us know, the prediction of the European economy is really not that great, and we can see from many of the analysis created by these big consultant companies that by 2050, the European economy is really not that present internationally. And then there's the question of how the European industry should, first and foremost, kind of create a plan and a business strategy for avoiding such a thing. So from that, the European Union has started a discussion how it can create different types of stimuli to try to motivate a better prediction like that. And one of these lies within the joint undertaking, which is a sort of a shared financing thing between the European Union and each nation that participates. And one of those is focusing on access to competence and resources with respect to high performance computing, high performance data analytics, machine learning, AI, and all related associated technologies. And that is called Euro HPC, the joint undertaking. And within that Euro HPC joint undertaking, there's a project called Euro CC. So this is a little bit sort of boring project backgrounds and a little bit of the background on where we are coming in. But the problem and the motivations for this are also sort of more general and lies fairly closely to all the industries in Europe. So within the Euro CC, the point being to create a competence center across Europe, basically in each participating nation. So there are over 30 competence centers that has been created. And the focus of that is to be there for the industry, public sector, and partly academia. For most countries, the industry sector is by far the most important. also the public sector to some extent, but it's the industry that needs the stimuli and help for this. Now we all know that this digital shift is going to be fairly tough for many, and especially in Europe, possibly because of the high costs we have. This is even more important. So focusing on efficiency, automation, doing as much of modeling, etc., predictions you can do, also sort of on the business side, is all the more important in Europe. So we have to lead the way there, and the European Union is sort of here to support that through these projects, which is supposed to be seen as a resource for the industry. And the point being here that this is new and this is also fairly complex. So the point being that we start small and build from there. And the key concept is that we try to understand what is needed. And of course, to do that, we need to talk to the industry. The industry needs to talk to us. And we somehow need to figure out how we can best serve the industry in this. And basically here you can see all the different competence center that has been created. And what is a little bit different maybe in this case, even though it's called the competence center for sort of HPC, high performance data analytics, machine learning and AI, etc., is the fact that we can also provide resources for testing and things like this. It's not only for competence. And a little bit of a unique thing here is that what we did in Norway was that there was already a fairly well established framework for handling competence transfer on those topics in academia. But we lacked sort of the connections and sort of a foot in the ground towards the industry. So we discussed and we partnered up with Norse and SINTEF. So there's Sigma, Norse and SINTEF in Norway, in the Norwegian Competence Center. And then Norse and SINTEF would bring in sort of the industry side of this. And this creates sort of a unique competence center in Norway that not only are able to provide the competences that this competence center should provide, but also the connections into sort of the domain-specific competences that sits with these institutes. And that's really great. And we believe that this is one of the most important things going forward, is to have the competence sitting between the domain and sort of the more technical ICT related competence. Because you kind of have to understand where the problems are and how to address them numerically and all this type of things. So we believe we are sort of rigged well in that sense to tackle this. And we would like to collaborate directly with the industry and also, of course, through these EDIH and SFIs and other types of hubs that exist. NORA is one of them, obviously. And all the partners now in the Competence Center are really understand the importance of a concept like this, also outside sort of the EuroCC project definitions. So we are having continuous discussions about the role of this competence center going forward, regardless of financing and the status of the backing from the European Union and Norwegian Research Council, because we believe this is a resource that's very important to have. And then, of course, we should support the industry and public sector, and that's a little bit of a fuzzy concept and needs a little bit more definition, maybe. So what do we mean with support? And basically, the main gist of it is mainly that you kind of have a lot of technical backends that you need to utilize, but on the front end, you're mostly interested in a specific or a set of problems, and you want answers to them or solve them in some way. And then that's what sort of the industry and the employees and I mean, researchers or even academia is most interested in. They are not interested in all the back-end stuff. So this is what we will try to focus on in this competence center, is to try to be very aware of the complexities of this back-end part. It is necessary, obviously, to solve the problem or challenges, but it's something that sort of the end user should not need much knowledge about or need to interact with. So we believe that this is sort of what we mean with support here, and obviously then supporting the industry not only with sort of linking sort of their problem challenges with sort of the technical backend to solve them, but also if necessarily help them to understand sort of what's in, to understand what they can do better, because that is not always clear. Also, it's not always clear for us, obviously, but this is something that one can discuss and bring in also dedicated domain knowledge from Norse and SINTEF to discuss this further and try to find solutions to this. And this obviously also goes into sort of the business development side of things, where you might see that, okay, can we take this technology into a totally new market and benefit from that, etc. And all these things might not necessarily be clear at the start of these discussions, but that's the point of it. So basically, we are here for you. That's the point. And the support, we are also supported by hard resources, which are quite unique, as I mentioned. Main focus is for us to try to abstract away all the technicalities so that sort of the end user don't have to know a lot of details about this. This doesn't mean that if there is end users or entities that really wants to focus on that, that's not a problem. We can give you easy access to resources if you need just that. That's not a problem, but we see that is maybe not where the bulk of our efforts will go. And these questions are, what do you need? And maybe you don't know it yet, right? I mean, these are the typical questions we typically see. And in order to make this more concrete and specific and sort of hands-on, because this type of concepts and projects and establishments quickly become something that just floats in the air. We quickly realized that we need to go down and do this on a one-by-one basis through use cases. So we have defined several. Here are a few of them, where we actually work together directly with the industry. So we have one in healthcare, agriculture, process industry, power market simulations, and in sort of environmental sciences. And in the end, we also have a public demonstrator use case, which is basically there to try to illustrate the concept of abstracting away the technicalities of all this and showing the added value and what the competence center can provide and how sort of the industry can benefit from this, especially how you can quickly get going with prototyping, which is typically a big barrier. So with that, I just wanted to conclude and thank European Union and Research Council for the support. And then I think we will move on to some discussions.
Yeah, that's all great, Espen. But a lot of sort of slides and words. Could you just try to boil it down to one sentence?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, this is something that we hear from time to time. I guess if we were to define it in one sentence, what the sort of competence center is, and also the competence center is really not a great word for this, since the competence is very general. But this was a definition we had to work with through the European Union. So maybe that will change in the future. We'll see. But let's say maybe we can say something like it's a center that can provide sort of compute, storage, and hard infrastructure, and sort of the competences to go with this, how you integrate this into your domain-specific challenges to give you an advantage in sort of a competitive market. I guess that's maybe in one sentence. Yeah.
It's a fairly long one, but
yes.
But the center really encompasses quite a bit, and I think that this is something that would definitely be of interest to some of our clients. Well, all these centers are nice, and all these resources are nice, but what about costs? I mean, there's nothing such as a free lunch, or is there?
Well, actually, there are free lunches from time to time. And let me just share my desktop so you guys also can see how to find information later as well. So if we are discussing the hard resources like compute resources, you can find prices at the Sigma 2 website. Access to the services are defined in different categories depending on your funding scheme, or for example, if you are a strictly commercial business. We mainly provide the services to users in Norway, but we also are allowed to sell certain portions of the capacity to industrial use, where we typically then are at a commercial cost level. But we also have obviously the competence that Espen mentioned to bring with these resources to make it easier to use them. And we also have a test before invest, which is free to use, where we basically provide 10,000 CPU hours for any business to come in and test the environment to see if it's something that are useful for them. Or for example, if they have an idea or a workload they wanted to test to see how will it scale in a supercomputing environment.
Okay, that's nice. And so that means that beyond this sort of free lunch, you then pay as you go.
Yeah.
Is there some checks in place in case someone sort of inadvertently starts a very large job or fails in one of their scripts?
Yeah, absolutely. So we definitely have accounting in place to kind of protect the systems. And there's also legislations in place, for example, in EU, that prohibit us from selling more than 20% of the capacity to industrial use. And currently we have a limitation of 5% from our board because we really haven't been even near the 20% in the past. But there's ample resources available for industrial users today, so it shouldn't be a problem. And of course, also SINTEF also have compute resources that they can provide access to at a not-for-profit basis or full cost models. And they would not be governed by these limitations. So I understand that this obviously is confusing, but we are working on trying to make this easier to understand and with a clear overview, and we'll be producing that fairly soon, I hope.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then you have now resources right now and with prices on all that, but how is that with the future? I mean, the industry definitely doesn't want to have it only now, but they have to plan. They would want to see how could we go about our needs in the next 5 or 10 years. Is there something like a guarantee you can give?
So Sigma 2 is a government-owned non-profit organization, and as mentioned, we provide research to government-funded research according to the contribution models that you can see on the website. And we also provide access to industry at a close to commercial level price, as we are not allowed to sell resources below market value to avoid destroying the market.
Mm-hmm.
So that should be fairly transparent. And the Competence Center, on the other hand, is currently being funded by the Research Council in Norway and EU. So the services that we provide in the Competence Center are free. It's obviously intended to, in the future, to be self-sustained at some point. And hopefully that would be in a similar fashion with a non-profit. But we'll see that when our funding ends.
I see. That's interesting, and seems like the intentions are well in the way to support the industry. But if I look at it, what are the resources actually which you can provide? Is that very large scale? Is this very small? I mean, can I get an idea of how big these machines are, which I could get from you?
Yeah, so the hardware that you have available today in Sigma 2 is 4 systems, or 3 supercomputers and a service platform. So we have our previous generation supercomputer, which is fairly large in a typical scale. And it have a lot of different properties where typically are meant to be used at applications scaling fairly large. And it also has the support for example, high memory workloads with up to 6 terabytes of RAM in some of the nodes. But this is the previous generation, and we also have our system Saga, which is not meant as a high parallel system, but rather as a high I/O. So it's intended for those that need a lot of I/O processing, for example, in data analytics. And finally, we also have Betsy, which is the newest installation, which is fairly significant in Norwegian scale, with 172,000 cores, and consumes almost 1 megawatt of power. So it's a fairly large system and fairly fast. And on top of that, we have the service platform, which is more AI platform where you can quickly spin off in a web interface a container with pre-installed AI applications for running data analytics.
That's already a rather large systems with 170,000. I mean, you can think of bigger and of smaller sizes. If there would be maybe for SMEs, these sizes are good. But if you really have a demanding job because you are going in the really scalable area, is there something which goes beyond that? So I mean, if you really want to practice stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sigma 2 is representing Norway in Euro HPC collaboration. Meaning that we do have access to the large systems in Europe. And we are also a member of the LUMI consortium, where we co-funded the new supercomputer in Finland, which is one of the largest systems in the world. It's a completely different system compared to ours, which is mostly CPU-based. And the LUMI system will, on top of also having CPUs, but also have GPUs. So it will have more than 10,000 of the newest NVIDIA graphic accelerators. So it should be, I think it should be covering most of the workloads.
For some of the companies that we talk to, they don't really need, you know, a super computer. They might need a virtual machine with a flexible storage option. Can you spin up solutions for them, or?
Yeah, that we can do. And this is something that typically one refer to as sort of the long tail. So maybe I can show you that presentation slide again. So if I look at this one, so let's see. So this one, right? So typically one has the sort of national HPC centers, which depending on the nations and the type of the center and computer resources is typically somewhere plus minus in the medium HPC range. And then you sort of have the big computers in EU, etc., or in other places that are considered sort of exascale and very large for huge scale of the jobs. But then sort of down in the long tail, which is typically served by entities and local sites, There you typically have this functionality for providing virtual machines and a sort of light HPC, if you would like to call it that. And we believe that sort of this area is really important to serve, because this is typically the not only for resources where you typically need like a few VMs to deploy some services or set up something, but also because this is typically the connection point where you actually have data in, data out, and connect with the users and all this type of sort of important user-related services. So we are also discussing this and how to serve this, especially with respect to establishing some kind of resources, preferably basically being based on, for instance, OpenStack or some open solution for a cloud-based system, where you actually can do this very easily. And then, of course, then you can connect this to the backend services, whether that's storage or the bigger HPC services when you need to. So this would sort of be a great alternative to sort of the commercial cloud providers, which have their challenges, obviously, but also for serving resources in an isolated manner when you just need it on demand. And don't really want to take it to cloud for different reasons.
Yeah, because that's a question that we see raised by some, that they don't feel that their sort of business model is compatible with what the commercial cloud providers can offer for different reasons. And could you say something about that?
Yeah, so this is a topic that is coming up more and more often, I would say, is that and people tend to be more sort of skeptic about this now, which I think is good. I mean, sort of the commercial cloud providers is a really great service, right? I mean, you can easily get going fairly quickly. But also that sort of quickliness is obviously part of their business model, and their business model is obviously to make money off sort of your business model, and putting your business model into sort of the commercial cloud providers' business models is something that you need to be aware of. Of course, you can do an executive decision on that and go with it, but you should sort of try to weigh the pros and cons of doing that. For some things, prototyping in the commercial cloud is great. For other things, it should not be done. But this depends, and this is also something that we hope that the Competence Center could provide as a competence and discussion partner with respect to this, especially for startups where some of these concerns that maybe do not appear for you until, say, 5 years or 10 years down the line can be brought on the table now for discussion. And so there are many things here. For instance, predictability, right? I mean, so Azure, for instance, just raised their cost, and obviously they can do this if they want to. But there's also another thing, is that sort of you get this, most of the commercial cloud providers have a basic set of sort of cloud services like blob storage or sort of object storage. They have their compute things, etc. And those are fairly general, and it's very easy to migrate from your load from that to, say, an on-prem solution with OpenStack or to Amazon. But as soon as you start to use sort of the more integrated services, for instance, for data analytics and these type of things, which is really what they want, right? Because they want to kind of lock you into the platform, then it's much more difficult to move your workload. So this is something that we hope should get more attention going forward. So we shouldn't alienate the commercial cloud providers, because it's a great service, but we should be a little bit aware of the decisions that we make around it.
So we do have a question from the audience, and the question is whether we have a discount for startups or maybe a Black Friday offer. And I guess maybe I could actually answer that. So we do actually have a great discount for startups with Test Before Invest program, where you basically get 10,000 CPU hours for free no strings attached. So yeah, I think that should be a fairly great offer. And of course, beyond that, if you would choose to continue using the platform, that would be at a close to market cost, as mentioned earlier. But we would obviously also try to be competitive with the commercial cloud. So I would think it should at least not be more expensive. Another thing that I think it's important to mention related to the pricing that we also showed earlier on the webpage is that a lot of startups have financing through the Research Council. And of course, the work that they're doing through that financing, as long as it's below 12 million, I think it was, NOK, then it will actually be free of charge. Beyond that, 10,000 as well. And of course, if you have significantly more funding, it will still be extremely cheap using that resources because of the NFR funding kind of pre-qualifying you to use that infrastructure. Did you also have another follow-up? Yeah, and we obviously also provide service to PhD programs as well, but that would typically be through the membership of the universities. They both provide funding to us as well as also being a resource to us as NRIS, which was briefly touched in the presentation. So we can definitely also support postdocs and PhDs with competence as well, if there's anything related to that.
Yeah. And yeah.
Yeah, go on.
So, no, sorry. Yeah. I'm just going to mention that maybe all of you do not know, but the PhDs and postdocs are typically set on a project, but quite a few of them are with these internal positions, and that by definition goes under the same. So if you are hired on an internal project with the university, for instance, as a PhD or postdoc, this is the same. So then you have free access to the resources.
I did have a follow-up question regarding the commercial clouds. I guess that there's major benefits in the ease of getting started, and that's great, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, this is the business model, of course, of these cloud providers. I mean, at the beginning, they make it very easy to get started, to go into their systems, to take the basic services, and everything is easy and get going. But then, of course, normally you don't end up just using compute cycles and storage, but then you want to have additional complex services, which they do provide as well, data analytics, machine learning, you name it. And all of that is, of course, complicated. And then it's not open anymore. And then you are getting, you can use it and you pay for it, but then you're getting stuck, or you may get stuck. Then you are getting a vendor lock and you are building your business into the business of the vendors. And then it is going still well and you have your small cases. But if then the business rolls and gets bigger and bigger, then the costs ramp up. And that is not necessarily just a linear scale and not necessarily maybe what you have initially thought is going to come up. So at the end, you are finding yourself in a locked situation, which you, with careful investigation, may not have chosen to take, but you were just went in for the ease of things. So you have to, for some people, it may be exactly the right solution, and you can make a conscious choice that this is the best. That is for some people and for some companies like that. But there are companies which would want to choose different models. And here is probably where the Competence Center, with its competence and overview, can contribute with significant insight so that companies do make a good choice for themselves and not a good choice for the service providers. So we have to, and that's where we want to help, of course, with the Competence Center.
Yeah, that's great. Sometimes we hear a lot of complaints about it's complicated to get access to the services, especially previously before the Competence Center. We heard this from partners that that it was required a huge application process and reviews and all these type of things. Is that still the case? And what's the status of that? It seems to be a sort of a barrier for commercial entities, possibly.
Yeah, for the academic access or research access, we typically have a biannual applicants program. But with a test before you invest framework, we can then easily give access within the same day. And of course, the HPC systems typically are controlled to our command line interface, and that could be intimidating for some users or for some companies. And that's also where we at the Competence Center can help in providing aid in how to use it, show best practice in using it, a lot of documentations and so forth. And the best way is basically to contact Espen, Klaus, or myself, because then we could also have a quick discussion exactly what kind of research you need also, given them the various properties of the different supercomputers. So some applications might benefit from one supercomputer, another application might benefit from another, and some application would be best working on a GPU, for example. But I think that test before invest is a good way of just getting very quick access, so you can test it, and then you can basically take it from there.
Great. Another thing that we also hear from partners is that with these type of concepts, they have a little bit of a problem relating to what's in it for me and this type of things, even though it's somewhat stated. Sometimes they would like to relate to specific examples and these type of things. And do you have something specific you can talk about with respect to that?
Absolutely. So I do realize that what we're trying to communicate is different to grasp, because it's just so much. So I think the use cases are good examples that can show exactly what we are doing in each of those individual use cases. Klaus, would you maybe talk us through what you're doing with a 3B use case?
Yeah, I can do that. 3B, I work with 3B fiberglass already now since a good half year. It's a fiberglass, it's a company producing fiberglass, so it's a medium-sized company with something like 200 plus employees in Norway, Kristiansand area. So they are in business since 40 years, and they know very well what they're doing. They're doing a fiberglass then used for automotive and aero industries. So what they have as a question, which is for them related to future competitiveness, is how they can control their quality, the quality of their products, and how can they optimize production. And here they want to get started with Industry 4.0, with machine learning, artificial intelligence. They do collect data, and now they come and say, okay, we know a little bit about machine learning, we have a lot of data, and we know our products very well, of course. And we know where we have problems, and we want to model, for example, the quality in a certain measure. And they say, okay, but is our data now enough for it? Do we have enough data? Because we have gigabytes, terabytes of data, so it seems like we have a lot of data. Is this data enough to predict everything? So you can have fantasies, and as they don't know much about machine learning, we go into these questions. I look with them into their measures of how things are, quality is assessed, and we want to relate this quality measures to the production parameters. And then it turns out, yes, they do have a lot of data, but they not necessarily have the right data. So what they are now working on is, how can we improve, how can we measure the right data? It's not just data is data. Some data is useful, some data is not that useful. So you have to be a little bit aware of which kind of things you need for measure, for modeling. So they learn together with me a fraction of machine learning, that type of machine learning which is important for them. And they know, and they learn how much data quality matters. And that is, for example, one we have another case, but maybe let's leave it here. So they learn how to do machine learning and what is important. So they learn where do we have to get into, because they at the end want to do this core business themselves, but they want not to study 5 years machine learning until they have understood the whole thingy and know where to go, but they want to have a quick intro, exactly in that direction we shall go, we shall learn, and that is important, and this type of data we need, and then they get it. So we go together through this data jungle, which they have, to predict something which they eventually understand very good, because it's again moving into their day and into their business. And they're very happy with the learning curve they are getting, because they see A, it's difficult. B, they see it's not too difficult. They can learn. These are all clever people. They learn that quickly if they get a little bit the right pointer. And that's exactly the value in this type which we can provide.
Excellent, thanks. It's quite different from some of the use cases that we're doing at Sigma 2. I want to share them because we have 2 use cases where there are established companies with good knowledge about AI and have a good maturity in using AI. And actually one of them, DigiFarm, came from as a reference from Norway as well. So that's actually quite nice. But the interesting thing is that as they didn't have supercomputing or HPC available when they developed their workflows and algorithms, they obviously will have some problems scaling the workload, just because it was typically developed, for example, in the cloud. So what we're doing is that, or maybe what's interesting with the workflow is that they typically download some data, and then they do pre-processing on the data, which only consumes CPU and memory. And then when that has completed, they will then move on to a training job using only GPU. And then after that has completed, they will be going over to using CPU again for post-processing. And these kind of workloads can go on for days or maybe even weeks, where they would need a very powerful virtual machine in the cloud for being able to do all of the computations needed throughout the workflow. Which is obviously quite costly and also quite difficult to scale. So what we're doing to help them is that we kind of help them to split the workloads into individual tasks, depending on the requirements for computational resources. And then it can be submitted to the supercomputer scheduler with the dependencies and the requirements for different type of hardware, so that when the post-processing task is starting, they can then be spread across thousands of CPUs, speeding up the post-processing, while no GPU has yet been locked down for using. And as soon as the post-processing has completed, then it will then be handed over to the GPU, leaving the CPU available for other users. Same also then obviously been going over to the post-processing. So it's much more efficient use of resources, and it's also something that can be adapted in the cloud as well. So it's not something that will be locked into us in the Sigma 2 systems or in supercomputing systems. It can still be adapted also to be used in the cloud for using that resources more efficiently as well.
Mm. Great, Roger. I see there are some questions here, so maybe we should address them. So there's a question about startups. So could we have 10,000 hours free access to supercomputer and the resources to go with it to get started? And then there's another one. What if the Norwegian company has a data scientist abroad?
Yep, no, we can start with the first question. Yes, so any startup can basically come to us and they can then have them access to the program to get 10,000 hours for free. And a limitation, I think, for storage is about 5 terabytes, but we're not that too strict if they need 5.1, for example. And of course, as we also mentioned, we also provide the competence resources. So if they don't have the competence to use these kind of systems themselves, or if they need some help along the way, and that is also kind of what we are providing in the competence center. And of course, if they already have data scientists abroad, it doesn't really matter, because the most important thing is that it's a Norwegian company, and those are the ones that we're typically helping. But we obviously have a collaboration with the other competence centers in Europe. So it could also be a collaborative effort, for example, between our competence center and another competence centers in a different country, if some of the resources within the company are, for example, in Spain.
Great. And I think I just wanted to add as well, I think it's important to emphasize that even though there are some limitations to the sort of hard resources, any competence transfer, training, etc., related to that is free, regardless of how extensive it is, as long as it fits within the time schedule of sort of the competence center, which is there to stay, hopefully, well into the future. So yeah, so maybe we have another use case as well so maybe Paul can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is a use case for a rather small startup. Last year they were 3 people, and one of them has technical training. The 2 others are working with business development, and this year they've added a legal resource and a sort of business developer, an additional one. It's a Norwegian startup in the southern part of Norway called Ocean Term, and sort of their business model is to try to develop a technology which can mitigate the effect of hurricanes and typhoons. On the surface of it, this sounds like a madman's thinking, you might say. But our research has shown they've done field tests that have been successful. But the underpinning of the technology requires massive computational resources before you go in to build a full-scale prototype. And also in a sort of business setting, they will need to run forecasts similar to the forecasts that are done for weather prediction today. But since they are not a organization that has a lot of scientific resources in-house, they rely on the research institutes and the universities in Norway to help them develop this. And so as a use case in this competence center, we're setting up a workflow where we're coupling public data sets from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the US to a model in SINTEF, which calculates sort of the performance of the system. And this is then transferred to a regional ocean model, which then predicts the sea surface temperature resulting from the proposed system. And then this is supposed to be mapped back onto the publicly available oceanographic data to see how their systems perturb the sea surface temperature. And it's not enough to just do one simulation. You need to do hundreds and thousands of simulations, and you need to orchestrate this. So in their design phase, they need a tool to sort of be able to figure out what are the best locations. So you could say it's analogous to where do you put a wind farm? You don't just say that, well, I got some fields here, so we want to put up a wind farm. You need to find out what is the best location for the wind farm, and within that area you need to find the optimal positions. And it's the same thing with Ocean Term's technology. They need to figure out relative to the weather patterns and the ocean circulation, where do they put their process equipment, and where do you basically get most bang for the buck. And then it's also extremely costly to operate. So you need to know when to push the big button, or whether you should just wait this one out because the effect will not be sustainable or give any payback for the clients. So then you need these automated workflow managers, and a front end where a non-technical expert can operate the models in a sort of interactive design process. So it's a very interesting use case because it couples a lot of different scientific models basically, and tries to spin a very interesting business model on top of it.
Okay, that's very nice to hear, actually. I also fancy sort of these specific examples, and we also have additional ones that we are working on and are very happy to start.
I could maybe mention one thing, and it's just the economics of this thing, and that is that the damage made by a single hurricane in the US is equal to the national budget of Norway. And they have usually 5 to 10 of these a year. So the economic stakes here, not just the environmental stakes, are very, very high, because with these hurricanes, you have storm surges that go way inland and wash all sorts of uncontrolled pollution out into the seas again. So there are many very fascinating aspects with this this use case.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Paul. Very interesting to hear this. So I think maybe we should try to wrap up a little bit. So obviously the Competence Center is there to provide the competence transfer and training, which is we can also do on demand. So if there are sort of dedicated things and topics that really are not available, we can also assist in trying to get to the bottom of that for each particular case. And obviously a lot of the activity that we would like to focus on goes also way beyond technical sort of training and competence transfer, and it's lies much closer to sort of the domain specific competences that would be necessary. For instance, for ML, machine learning or AI, or also the dedicated domains that the industry would work within. So, for instance, in the last use case, it's the sort of fluid dynamics and the flow of things and climate stuff and all this type of things that you need to connect together, and people need to understand these things and have them speak together in a unified interface. But maybe we can wrap up in the end, and Roger, maybe you can say a few words about the future of the Competence Center. What do we foresee going forward here?
Yeah, absolutely. So, but I just wanted to also say a few words about training as you start mentioning that. So we do obviously provide training, and you can find information about the training events that we are organizing. So we are lucky to have the universities to help us produce a lot of the training. And there are very skilled, excellent people there that can do a lot of good training. But we are also collaborating with coal refineries and carpentries that provide trainings as well as also many of the international partners we have also. So please drop by and have a look at the training. And as Espen said, if there's a particular field that are interesting and that you can't find anywhere else, we can definitely try to develop that as well. And regarding the future of the Competence Center, so it's obviously something that we want to be a low entry barrier with on-demand competence. And in the future, if it will be kind of a cost model for using the competence, I think that will be fine. But of course, we would hope that would be a non-profit and also maybe free entry and so forth. So we think this is something that should be in a total as a resource for industry and public sector, and then not a framework for creating profit. But only future can tell how that will develop. But hopefully we'll have a lot of success showing what they have done from helping the various SMEs through the use cases, and that will also help attracting more use cases and prove it's a sustainable model of operating with providing competence. So I guess we're out of time now. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Seems like we don't have any more. So I guess the only things remaining is to thank Nora for organizing this webinar for us. So it was, we really appreciate the collaboration with Nora, and are enjoying a lot of the activities there as well. So thank you all for attending also.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Ashin, you can stop the recording, I guess. Thank you, Rituka. We appreciate that you like the webinar. If anyone is left here and would like to just tune in a little bit at the end here, of course we can unmute your microphone. So please just raise your hand if that's the case, and we'll have a couple of minutes here if you want to discuss with us directly.
And of course, anyone can contact us and ask questions directly as well. So I'm just happy to be contacted by anyone.
Great. Well, it doesn't seem like the audience want to unmute themselves. So, so with that, I think we'll thank you so much, NCC, for hosting this webinar, and thank you to the audience for attending and for the questions that you sent in along the way. And as was written here as well, feel free to reach out if you have any more questions or want to get in touch for collaboration and so forth. Good.
Bye. Great. Bye.
Bye, everyone.